Okay, so hi everybody. Welcome to the latest series of Wasserman at Silver. I think Shilpa was going to do an introduction, but I've just introduced myself. So my name is Lesha Harhai. I am the recruitment manager over at the NYU Wasserman Center for Career Development. And Wasserman at Silver is a program that we do in conjunction with the Department of Student Affairs. Here, work primarily with Shilpa to kind of put together a series of different professional development seminars for our social work students as you guys begin to figure out different fieldwork placements you want to do. There may be some of you graduating, looking for full-time employment. Before we get started, a little demographic count. Anyone a first-year MSW student? One?
I'm in the advanced standing, so it's my first.
Okay.
And last.
Second-year master's students, so graduating very, very shortly. So I will first start off by saying I apologize. I had a PowerPoint that we were going to go over. It is in my drafts folder that has not been saved on my desktop at my office. However, this actually works a little bit better because I tend to hate to talk off of presentations, and I can answer some of your specific questions. We can talk about specific things that are on your resumes if anyone has them, and I like to turn it into a little bit more of an interactive seminar. We can also share the presentation slides with you, but I will definitely say they are pretty much more general than anything else. So before we do that, I have passed out our resume guidelines for graduate students. This is actually a new document that the Wasserman Center has rolled out for our graduate student population. So we used to have one that was resume guidelines for master's students, which we completely have gotten rid of, and we recommend that this is the top, kind of the handout that you should be using, because we do feel that our graduate student population is coming in with a variety of different experiences, be it some professional work experience, be it coming directly from an undergraduate environment, coming in from maybe another master's degree program and you've taken some time off and are a career changer. So we really revamped this entire document in kind of thinking, what should be students including, what are some potential formats that you can be using. One of my favorite parts is the action verb list, which we have divided into different buckets. So under management leadership skills, creative skills, communication, organizational, and so on and so forth. Because if you've seen some of our documents before, you'll know that it was in just one very big list, which can be helpful to students, but when you're trying to figure out to describe different types of experiences that you've had, we hope that this will be a little bit of a better guideline for you. So first and foremost, in terms of some of the things that we recommend for social work students, there is no standard template. I will say this first and foremost, and I really recommend to students just open up a clean Microsoft Office Word document. Do not try to download anything from the internet. And the reason why we suggest this is that if you only want to have one version of your resume, that's an excellent tool to use. However, once you start updating, wanting to change the margins, the fonts, you then become owned by the template as opposed to you owning the template. So you want to be able to have, I really say in spacing and formatting and margins and all of those things are things that you want to be able to adjust, because I guarantee you the version of your resume that you have now will not be the version of your resume you have even 6 months from now. So we always really encourage students to just start from a clean blank page and then start adding content. The first thing you obviously want to include on your resume is your contact information. We need to know whose resume we are actually looking at it. One question that we get all the time is, what if I don't want to put my permanent contact address because I just don't want to give that information away. Maybe I'm in the process of moving apartments or I'm relocating and I don't have a contact, a local or a permanent address just yet. Our answer to that is that's totally fine. We understand some people will do it for safety concerns as well. We usually just kind of have to say potentially maybe the city and the state. So if you're going to be looking at opportunities outside maybe of the tri-state area, say you're originally from Chicago or Los Angeles and we'll be going back to those areas, we want to know kind of where an applicant is coming from, especially if there needs to be virtual interviews scheduled, time zone things. We see it a lot for our students who may do study away opportunities, or if you're in the middle, more for some of our first year students, if you decide to travel over winter, spring, summer vacations and will be out of New York for an extended period of time, having that city and state option is good. We definitely recommend you include your phone number and email. You would actually be very surprised about how many students sometimes forget that, but we want them to be able to contact you. Most of the time, people will reach out via email to schedule phone screens or interviews or things of that nature, but obviously then they need a contact phone number for you to be able to do that. So make sure at minimum that you have your name, your contact phone number, and your contact email on there. The second, and probably one of the most important sections on there, is your education section. And this section also has some discrepancies as well, because students are always asking, well, I've worked for a few years, where do I put the education section on my resume? My recommendation to anyone who is currently enrolled in a program is your education section should go first, because you want to provide some context about why you're applying for positions. We also get, sometimes the question on resumes will be, what if I have some gaps on my resume? When you are a student enrolled in a graduate school program and it's a full-time program, we expect to see shorter experiences on your resume. That to us is not a gap. A gap is more defined of that you have to take maybe a leave of absence from your professional opportunity for personal or family reasons, or maybe you're coming back to school and you took time off to raise your children, or you were laid off and needed to find a job, or in some cases you were fired or terminated from a position and then you needed to find additional employment. That is what we consider a gap. You being a full-time student and maybe doing an internship and then your fieldwork placement, or maybe not doing anything because you've got a course load that just doesn't allow for additional, that to us is not a gap. But the easiest way to determine that is by saying, I am a current MSW candidate, first and foremost, New York University, Silver School of Social Work. I always recommend to our social work students, put the Silver School of Social Work. It's similar to like putting Stern or Tisch. Sometimes the school itself is sometimes more recognizable as a program than the fact that you're an NYU student, especially in terms of networking. I've spoken to many alumni who don't even reference NYU. They tell me I'm a Silver alum, which is wonderful, and it gives you guys a great community to choose from, but that sometimes that Silver School of Social Work will be more recognizable and a more instantaneous connection than the NYU portion will be, but we should have both the university and the school. Obviously, it's very important to include the degree that you are pursuing and when your expected graduation date is, because we want employers to know if you're doing fieldwork placement, are you doing that because this is that part of your program where it's time to do that, or if you're going to be graduating soon, if you're graduating in December, you're going to be looking potentially for opportunities that may start in January and February. It also gives some context to the employer to understand that this student will be credentialed, have the degree that I need in January as opposed to a May graduate. In this section, debatable, you could include some sort of relevant coursework. All that really would be is like a list of courses that you think you might take if you've got a specialty or you've kind of designed your coursework in a way that has some patterns. You can just make a list. We don't need grades or like dates that you've taken the courses, just some overarching concepts about that. We do recommend it does change regardless of everybody's personal situations, to include either additional master's degrees you may have gotten, your undergraduate degree, any study away experiences that you may have. And this will obviously be specified to the particular student and the applicant, but we also want to know where did your bachelor's degree come from? If you have another master's, what is it? Also too, because a lot of the experiences you may have, especially if you are a career changer and someone who's coming back into the academic arena after many years of being away, and your experience may be in a completely different industry than social work, but you may have a degree that corresponds with that. So you kind of want to also provide some context to the employer about, because you've got X number of experiences on your resume, this is why, because you had a degree in psychology or, chemical engineering or whatever, but now you've decided to come back and get the MSW degree and you're going to be pursuing social work. So you want to make it, I tell students all the time, you want to make it very easy for employers to kind of glance at your resume and understand why you're applying for the positions that you're applying for, regardless of kind of what your background is and how you have now gotten into this program and are now going to be looking at these types of positions. Question?
Do you recommend, I I see that it says GPA.
Yes.
Yeah.
We definitely recommend if your GPA is a 3.0 or above, we recommend that you include it on your resume for the mere purpose of letting somebody know that it's a good, solid GPA. In some instances, and not so much in social work, we see that there are usually not GPA minimum requirements for a lot of the positions. I think in the social work field, it's actually more important that you have the experiences and you be able to connect on a person-to-person level, but sometimes GPA does matter to employers because it also gives them an easy connection to understand how well you're doing in those academic lessons and how you're doing as a student. And it's just an easy way that to just you get it out of the way and just have it on there.
So should it be to the second digit? Like
Let's
say it's 3.95, would you put that up?
Yes, so we recommend whatever NYU gives you, so whatever you can see in PeopleSync or whatever's on your unofficial transcript, we're to 2 digits. We recommend, actually leads into a good point, do not round. NYU doesn't round, we don't round. So you can't, so say a good example is if it's a 3.95, it's a 3.9. We're not rounding to a 4.0 because a 3.9 is not a 4.0. You can always reach out to employers.
So you wouldn't put the 5?
If they're saying they're only asking, like say if you're applying, on your resume you can put 2 digits.
Like
but
3.95?
yes. If you're applying, say online for an online application and you've got it's got character limits on it, we get this question a lot all the time, especially for our students who participate in like our on-campus recruitment program or who are applying online through NYU CareerNet. Sometimes they also have you apply on like an organization's website and they only say we want it to 1 decimal. 3.9, it's not a 4.0. So that's sometimes the question. On your resume, you have a little bit more flexibility there. So that's really that main education section. The second thing that I typically recommend to master's students across the board, and definitely our doctoral students, so the graduate student population, is any academic work that you may have done. Part of a master's degree program or graduate degree program, depending once again also the types of courses that you're taking, you may be engaging in different types of academic research projects. You may have to write a thesis for a particular class. You may have an extended semester-long project that requires you to put like a patient care treatment plan together. There are all sorts of different things that you can do. So in that regard, we do recommend that students do a separate academic project / research section. And in that section, you would reference the name of the course, the fact that you've taken it here at NYU because you may have had to write a thesis for your undergraduate work or another master's that you've done, the semester that project takes place in, and then a very brief description describing what that project was, how you put it together, what the outcomes were, if you presented it, all of those different types of things, because we also understand that in very intensive graduate level education, you get the opportunity to work with faculty within your field. You may contribute to people who are writing articles on different things, and those are things that whether it's part of class or whether it's like an external opportunity, you can include those things on there, especially depending on when you're looking at certain positions. You may be looking at any point maybe at more administrative things. Maybe you're looking into getting a PhD and teach within the social work field. Those things will obviously become really important when people are looking at your resume. So yeah, we definitely recommend students, if you have those experiences, to include them. If you don't, and you've been more traditional internships, jobs, we know students can't do everything. We don't expect you to do everything, but we do want you to highlight some of the things that may be different about your experience than maybe some other applicants who might be in the pool. And in many cases, academic work is one of those things. And then we move into probably the most important sections is when we start to talk about your experiences. And your experiences are defined by a wide variety of things. They can be your social work clinical experiences, so whatever you've done in your fieldwork. It could be other full-time jobs that you've held, depending on where you are in the stage of your career. It could be internships that you've held outside of the fieldwork placement that you've taken on independently. It could be retail positions that you've held because this is NYU and it's expensive and you have to live. It could be leadership organizations that you're a part of. So if you're involved in any social work organizations here, either within the school or if you're involved in anything as an NYU graduate student. So that's why I tell students it's all of those experiences all count. They all shouldn't be smashed into one subsection heading. That's where we then want to figure out, okay, these are all the things I want to highlight because this will talk about my leadership, this will talk about my actual experience within the social work field, this will talk about my time management, collaboration, all of these things that employers want to see. For social work students, I typically recommend you start with anything that is social work related. This is assuming that you want to continue to work in the social work field. Mind you, we know that some students will graduate with an MSW degree and then go on and do something else. And your resume, even though you have the degree, should look very different than a student who's maybe gonna go a little bit more of a traditional path. But first and foremost, for social work students who want to utilize the degree that they are receiving here, your field work, if you're at that level, should be first, and then whatever maybe internships you've done within the social work space should go first. And that should include your position title, the name of the organization, the location, and some of these things are included kind of generally in the handout. The dates that you did that speaks to that little gap present. So if it's a 4-month thing, anyone reading your resume, we know that this student did it during a semester, and maybe a little bit longer, maybe a summer experience. And then most importantly, you wanna then put bullets about your experience. I recommend students use bullets. There are different variations. Some students are very big on phrases and like mini paragraphs. For me, organizationally, I kind of don't really like it all that much. Two, I don't necessarily think it's a great way for students to talk about all the different things that they do in an experience, because you may have patient care interactions. You may have administrative responsibilities. You may be responsible for budget, depending on what it is. So think about each bullet as a separate type of project or bucket. So I typically think about it in terms of like what you've actually done within the field. So like the practical social work care that you're providing. Think about administrative things. And then you may be required to do like social media or like filing or like things like that. Bullets can be used as different buckets. Yes? If it is relevant to the positions that you are applying for. So this is where it becomes difficult for our graduate student population, because some of you are coming in with like a whole wealth of experience. Some of it may have absolutely nothing to do with what it is that you want to do going forward, and that's a hard decision to make, because you have to think about, the question you should always ask yourself when you include anything on your resume is this relevant to the work and the application that I'm applying for? It may be relevant to you, and I'm sure students do a lot of really worthwhile, valuable things in terms of your own development, but you have to think about it, is it going to matter to the employer? If the answer to that is no, it doesn't mean that we're getting rid of that experience forever and for always. It just means for that specific application, there may be something else that's going to get you a better chance of interviewing and hopefully getting the job. It can be difficult for some students, and that's when we definitely recommend that you kind of come in and speak with us about it, because we can help you figure out what you should include, what maybe doesn't necessarily need to be as prevalent on your resume as it may have been in previous years. This is why it's always really important to, the first round of creating a resume is always going to be the easiest, because you're going to put everything and anything on it. The second round is that resume should always be modified to the positions that you are applying to, because not every position is going to be relevant. If you worked retail for 7 years, we don't necessarily need to know that every single thing you did as a retail manager. We may want to put that you worked in that position so that I can see that you've got supervisory responsibilities and things like that. But to a social work employer, it's not going to be as important as like what your fieldwork placement really is. So you can choose some of the organizations that you maybe have been a part of, or some of the internships. Maybe if you're working on health policy, you kind of have to evaluate it based on what the position is asking for. And if maybe there's something administrative in that position that relates directly to it, even if the content isn't necessarily the same. So then that's kind of how you go. You start with those social work, fieldwork placement opportunities, any internship kinds of things. Because I always tell students, if you were to stop reading in the middle of your resume, would I know the most important things about you? Because it takes an employer will spend about 30 to 60 seconds looking at your resume, which I wish I was kidding about that number, but when you have 100 on your desk, and look how many students you're graduating with just in the Silver School of Social Work, it can be mind-boggling, and everybody's entering the job pool pretty much at the same time, which is great for employers, but also not so great in the fact that they have to then kind of pick a needle out of a haystack in terms of who's going to be a good fit and kind of cross their fingers that their interviews are going to go well. So I always tell students,
so I've heard that instead of doing an objective, you do a professional summary.
Yes, excellent question. I am not personally a very big fan of those. Those are great for LinkedIn. Those are great to use as a pitch when you're introducing yourself to an employer. I have never seen one, and this is not, if there are some students who write these things very well, on the whole, students are not that great at writing them.
About this,
Yeah, there are different options and objectives. Every career coach will tell you something a little bit different based on what our own personal style is. Ultimately, it's your resume. If you feel very confident with it and you think it's the best way to represent yourself and you feel like it's very well written, go for it. I'm not going to stop you. We just don't, because you have such a limited amount of space to also work with, we're really only thinking about one page of relevant activities. Master's students are the only ones that I even allow to consider having a 2-page resume, and you have to everything on there has to say something about why you're qualified for this position. Like, really hard fact, if I was to say, tell me why this position is on here to this job that you're applying for, if you give me a solid connection, we're golden. If you're like, well, I just think it would be nice for them to see, no. So you can cut it down a lot. So the objective in the profile is really just a restating of it, because, and the most common example is the students who tell me that they have great communication and detail-oriented, and then they spell detail-oriented wrong somewhere else in their resume. So that profile is usually never as impactful as I think a student really wants it to be. I wish it was, we just haven't come up with like a great way. I usually recommend students to do that when you are a career changer, or the bulk of your experience doesn't match what you've been doing for the 2 years within this program, because then there are going to be things from other industries that are going to be more relevant, and then it works a little bit better that way. But if you're, if you've only, had an undergrad to an MSW program, or maybe you took a year off to work, it's really, I've never seen it as effective as I think students want, and it also doesn't explain to me where you got these experiences from. So like you telling me that you have great patient care, I would much rather see that in a bullet in an internship when you talk about a specific caseload or you talk about a specific population that you've treated, because to me, that's connecting, oh, this person worked here, this is what they were responsible for, this is what we would need them to do, because it's not that we don't believe you, but then there's more proof in the detailed experience sections. But I definitely say really valuable on LinkedIn profiles, because those things can be like ridiculously long. Really great to use for yourself when you're writing cover letters, because then you can figure out these are the different things I want to highlight and then talk specifically about those things. Or that's your pitch to an employer. When you've got 5 seconds to make a good first impression and you're highlighting those major things about you, if they want to still talk to you, that's when you start going on basically the rest of the resume. So good to have. I would forfeit that section to maximize more content on your resume. Yes?
You mentioned speaking of first and foremost about your field experience.
Yeah.
And I just am questioning, say you want to go and work with a different population or do something totally different. Is speaking about that experience, if it's not necessarily relevant?
It depends on whether, because my question back to you would be, do you have experience working with the population that you want to work with?
Right.
So if you don't, obviously you cannot, you've only got the set of experiences you've got. My recommendation to a student that yes, you still, even though the population may be different, a lot of the treatment options may be the same, the kind of the formula that you use as a social worker will be the same. That's a great opportunity to show that you've had exposure in that. That would be a great example then further in a cover letter to say, maybe not that I haven't had experience with this population, but I learned how to work with a variety of populations here, would be excited to apply for this type of position, and would feel that a lot of these things that I learned working with the elderly would translate into working with children, as an example. So I think that your whole thing is not necessarily, you want to also be careful there that you don't get into too many of the nitty-gritty specifics, because you may apply for positions that are going to require you to do a lot of other things that you may or may not have had exposure to. You might have pieces of exposure. No employers are going to ever, believe that you're 100% qualified for a job. We've never really seen that happen, even when you get promoted internally and things are working out for you in your place of work. There are always going to be a learning curve. There's always going to be things that you need to learn, especially if you're going into a new organization. Even if you've worked with that population, one organization may serve that population in a much different scope than another one does, and you're going to be required to learn their process, even though you're going to be bringing in some of maybe the patient care techniques, how to do treatment plans, how to follow up, document stuff from other organizations. So we start off with the fieldwork, social work, placement. Then it's really up to you about kind of where you want to go. Some students will go more into a leadership volunteer capacity and talk about things that are a little bit more social work oriented there. Once again, same thing, putting the position title, whatever position that you held within that organization, the name of the organization, whether it was at NYU, whether it's a professional affiliation that you may have, and how long you've been a member. So say if you were like membership chair for the National Association of Social Workers, and you detail some of the things that you did in that space. Or say you were part of like the social work student government here, detailing what you did there, or if you volunteered at any hospitals, things like that. The next kind of section that could play into that is then going on into any additional professional experiences that you may have had that are not social work relevant. So that we see a lot of people, who maybe have worked as administrative assistants. Like I have the example that I use from my own resume is that before I transitioned into higher education, I was working as a professional development assistant in a law firm. So I still consider that relevant experience because it's professional development, which to your point kind of translates into some of the same things when you're not necessarily working with like attorneys are very different than students. Not so different in some instances. You guys actually might be a little bit more organized than they are. But because of some of the skill sets I did in terms of developing professional development program, that translates into what I now do at Wasserman. So you can do, if you've done administrative work, filing, things like that. So you can choose to do that in a couple of different ways, depending on how many professional experiences you've had and how you want to highlight them. Some students will do them in the traditional format of including bullets about the descriptions. Some of them will actually just list saying, I worked as a paralegal for 7 years. I'm now coming back to get my MSW. Not necessarily that you need to explain it, but you want to show what you've been doing in that potential gap of time and kind of why you're now in the social work field. So that's the experience section. I tell students, divide them up into different headers and buckets because that's also visually appealing, is that as an employer, you're looking at, how are the different experiences divided? How is this person talking about their experience and how are they showing me that it's relevant to the position or the organization that they're applying to? So we've seen everyone do stuff from like a relevant clinical experience to field work experience to relevant social work experience to additional professional experience, all sorts. They're just headers. So you can choose to kind of call them whatever it is that you want and however best reflects how you want to talk about your experience, like how you present yourself as a candidate. Think about how you would verbally do that. Usually that's the way it can translate into a resume when you say, when you talk about it in terms of priority. Other sections to potentially include on a resume, skills, 100%. And when we talk about skills, we talk about hard and language skills. So by hard skills, what we mean are if you have any technical proficiencies. So we're talking Microsoft Office, Excel, any database research, if you worked in social media in any previous lives, talking about how you know how to do different computer software, computer kind of technology in there.
You should really write Microsoft Office.
You can. Some people, we go back and forth on this argument. At this point, I'm going to hope you know how to use it. However, I definitely had a student who was emailed back by an employer and asked, do you not have any skills? And like literally the expectation, he was only going to write Microsoft Office there. So we said, okay, well, why are we going to put this on there? It's just one very small line. We can use that line in better options. So sometimes employers are picky on it. And we do include Microsoft Office because there can be advanced proficiencies in those types of things. Like say if you're in Excel, some of the big functions on there are like pivot tables, macros, different budgeting things like QuickBooks. You should put whatever it is you feel comfortable with putting. I tell students, Microsoft Office is a fine thing to put on there. You don't necessarily need to write out Word, PowerPoint, Excel. Microsoft Office is fine. And then hopefully one day we won't have to make you guys put that and everyone will just like assume that you've made it this far in life. Like maybe you know how to open up a Word doc. Considering the resume that you have made is on a Word document, one would assume that if it looks good, you have some sort of proficiency in it. But once again, it's one of those weird things about career development that it's like, it's weird if it's not on there, but it's weird if it's on there. So we just tell students kind of to put it on there. And then definitely any language proficiencies, and we encourage students to list those from your most advanced proficiency. So if you have a native language that you speak, and then you're fluent in something, intermediate in something, basic in something, and list those things out, especially for those of you who may be working with communities that have underrepresented minorities. Those things sometimes are really like golden for them to see, because even if you're not necessarily fluent in a language that that community speaks, would you be able to like intake a patient and get some information from them and kind of help them like figure out what it is that they need before transitioning maybe into someone who has a little bit more fluency than you do. But in a lot of cases, because the type of work that you do can be done in so many communities where there are so many different ethnicities and different language speaking populations of people, putting that on there is a really great thing. So that's really what we include about kind of the skills section. Please do not ever write that you have like good public speaking skills. We're talking about like good communication, that you write well. There is no way for us to prove those things except when we look at your experience sections. We want to, if you have good program management, talk to me in a bullet about what kind of program management experience that you have. I'm much more apt to believe you and kind of have a good recommendation, on how to do that, as opposed to you telling me in one bullet and I'm like, okay, well, where does this come from? Like, why does the student believe that? Yes?
What do you think about putting like specific programs in skills like MailChimp or a flyer making program?
You can definitely do that. We see students do like Adobe, Photoshop, InDesign all the time. One of the things that really shows to a student is that you can potentially like adapt to different programs, even if they don't necessarily use it. Sometimes they'll ask specifically for specific programming. Obviously, if you know how to do it, put it in there. But I would say if you've got specific programming capabilities, there's a decent chance they could use it, or it's something that you could implement when you come on board if you get the job. So potentially useful. Okay. So other than that, those are really the big bucket sections. I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but I'm sure you all have existing resumes. You know how easy it is to fill one page of information. Really, the most important thing you want to be thinking about is that you are applying for jobs within a very specific industry, and that are really asking for very specific qualifications that you're here getting as part of this particular program. So you want to make sure that you're reading the job description, and you can be using keywords and terminology that you guys are accumulating as social work students within those bullets. The great thing about kind of career development is that we don't really have many of the same like plagiarism or citation rules applying to us that like say the academic community does. I'm not saying that you should be copying and pasting from a job description into your resume, but if you have a social work resume and you're applying for a job as a social worker, I should see some terminology in your resume that's used in the job description. If it's talked about intake or patient diagnosis or treatment plans or patient care, things that you guys use commonly in everyday, when you talk to each other or when you're talking in the class setting or when you're in your internships or fieldworks, you want to be using that terminology, because once again, it's showing the employer that you've got insight into the industry, even if it's not 100% insight, but that it's something that I can teach you kind of how to learn what will work in our organization, because I understand that you have the basic concepts of what that means. And you're showing me how you've potentially gained that experience, whether it's things that you've been doing here as a student, so with clubs and activities or in your academic work, or stuff that you've been doing as part of the experiential learning. But I definitely recommend that before you start applying, come in to walk-ins. We have them all the time at the Wasserman Center, or schedule a 30-minute career coaching opportunity, just to have someone look at it again. In some cases, some students do a really great job on their resume, and it's just getting a second pair of eyes and we say, go forth, begin applying, this is great. And sometimes other students, when you're transitioning into new opportunities, maybe you've got like one too many on your resume, how do I cut it down? Sometimes just having somebody else look at it, because you live and breathe your resume. And you may also not look at it from the vein of, this is the job that I'm applying to. Does this qualify me for this? And sometimes that's the thing that students will forget to do, because you think it's just one resume. And in many cases, it can be just one resume, but there may be a bullet that you pull out to talk more about another experience that you've had for one job as you do for another, because you're like, oh, I totally did that. I want to talk about it a little bit more. As opposed to, do I really need to tell them that I learned how to like file at this job? You know, your resume should not be a laundry list of everything you've ever done. It should be you showing your candidacy on the experiences that you have to the person whose job you are applying to. You can have more general resumes, so say if you're going to networking events, to career fairs, to like alumni events, you're able to use a little bit more general stuff there, but if you're applying to specific positions, like the career fair is actually a great example. So during the MSW career fair in April, April 15th, it's here at NYU, you'll be getting like 7 million emails from Shilpa, from myself, from everybody about it. That's a great time that you don't necessarily need to have a specific resume because you're going to be talking to a lot of high volume employers where that can just be a general social work resume. But if you're going to sit down and then potentially apply, a resume that you submit to a hospital may be very different than you do to something within a private field space. And that's when you then start to tweak some of those experiences in there. Or if you're going to be, when you're applying for specific positions, you want to be a specific candidate. You want your resume to reflect specific experiences. Students do this all the time. They try to generalize everything because, resume writing is annoying. And applying to applications and jobs is annoying. I'm not going to tell you that it's not. I'm not. Because I was like that when I was applying for my job at NYU. And any positions that I've applied to since then and still had to submit resumes and cover, I'm like, why do I have to do this? You do it because you are not a general person. You aren't happy with just any experience. You've worked very long and hard on your academic journey, and in some cases you may have been working for many years before you decided to come back. And you really want to say, this is my specific skill set. You would be silly not to hire me because I'm able to do everything that it is you want me to do. Let me tell you about it. As opposed to just saying, here's my general experiences, cross my fingers that they pick me. An employer is not going to do that. They want the person who's going to match their job requirements, who wants to work in their organization, who wants to do what the mission of the organization is. That's why we recommend spend some time working on your resume, because even if you do have to update it every single time, if you get it to a point that you're happy with it and you're only making minor tweaks, it makes the actual process of applying a lot easier as well. Yes?
A couple questions. So back in the day, they would say put references available on request.
Nope. No. References will always be available upon request, so we don't even need you guys to put it on your resumes. But very good question, yeah. So I say if you have the space to put it, just do like a little interest header and then list out some of the things that you like to do. We say no more than like 3 or 4 on there, but sometimes it's a really good conversation starter as well. I've definitely had many students come into my office and say, we didn't talk about anything on my resume for the first 10 minutes. We talked about how we were both like New York Giants fans. So I think that they also want to find some common ground. I think it is important for social workers if you can fit it on there. I wouldn't want you to like eliminate a bullet in order to put the section on there, but it also depends on how much experience you're including on your resume, because a big portion of what you guys do requires you to interact with people. And so finding commonality in terms of working with colleagues is really important, because you need to be able to talk about something else besides the work that you're doing, because that's sometimes when we see our students kind of get burned out. We want to know that you have interests outside of what your professional spheres are, so that you do have something, that can kind of give you a relief from sometimes what can be a very high pressure work environment.
One more question.
Yeah, please.
In terms of the language, like skills, we said, if you have another language. So, I can speak a little bit of Spanish. It's not as good as it used to be.
Yeah.
It's really not. I'm not even half fluent in that. So, what would you say about that?
Yeah, I always tell for students, the hard thing that gets sometimes students into trouble with the languages is that you don't want to kind of overrepresent your qualification. And you can say, you can even do something as saying is very basic understanding of Spanish. Very basic. Yeah, I think it's whatever you feel comfortable with inputting that, to say that I would not get the wrong idea if I was looking at your resume. Because if you tell me that you're intermediate, but you've now just told me that it's not as great as it used to be, my recommendation would be, well, how do you feel about putting basic? Or you can even say, some students will say introductory knowledge of Spanish or whatever language it may be. As long as I think you kind of write it in a way that doesn't give that you're over the fluency, I think you're okay. Any other questions? Yeah.
How do you feel about having the skills section above the experience section so that it's not pushed over to the second page?
It depends. The only people I usually recommend to have technical sections above are students who are in a technical field. So we're talking about like our computer science students, we're talking about our engineers, because you guys, you don't necessarily need to know how to use Microsoft Office in order to be a social worker. It's helpful in terms of documenting, but it's not, for those types of students, like if you don't know how to code, I'm not gonna hire you to like code at Google. Unless they start coming out with like very specific social worker tools, there may be some databases, kind of patient tools that you may use, but in that regard, not every organization uses them. So that's why I would say that I would much rather see that towards the bottom in terms of priority, unless it's something that like the field starts to develop that you like know you need to have. Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm in the hospital field, so I know all the different types of software and all that.
You can actually make another potential section on your skills section if you want. Depends on how much space. Instead of doing computer skills, you can also do medical or like medical/technical skills and put some of the databases in that space. So that's another thing too, is that you can always change up those sub-headings. So within the skills section, instead of just doing straight computer, you can do a little bit more like a technical kind of setting for that. No problem. So any other questions? Yes?
I'm sorry.
No, please, we'll do it.
I'm taking up all the questions. So projected date of graduation, I know how to do that.
Yes.
I have a bunch of other degrees, besides a bachelor's.
Yeah.
So, and they go back in time. So what about dates? I mean, the last time I did a resume, which was actually for my current internship, I left all the dates out, and I think I've been doing that for a while because of, ageism and stuff like that.
Sure, yeah, I mean,
So I'm just curious.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's definitely obviously we are hoping that students are not being discriminated against. Obviously, we know in some cases that is not the case. It's up to you. I mean, if you feel like that, if it's going to necessarily give them something to kind of nitpick on your application about,
I mean, if you look at the dates of other stuff.
yeah, what sometimes we'll see is what students do, like we'll probably see potentially dates from their most recent degrees, so like what your expected graduation date would be here. So say if you got a master's like 2 or 3 years ago, I think it's fine to not include dates. It's difficult for me to look at it without like seeing it 100%, the formatting of it, but I don't think you necessarily need to include the dates in every single instance.
The most recent degree I had before this was over 20 years ago. So
Yeah, in that case then, because if you have more that align in that, you can just put the name of the institution and the degree that you received.
okay.
And if they really want to know and if it really matters to them, you can provide them with that information. But I would say it's fine, probably just make sure you have the expected graduation date for this degree, and then everything else can just be school, degree, and that's it.
Okay.
Yes.
Are you like the social work specialist at Wasserman?
So this is a very interesting question. The answer up until about a month ago was yes. I actually just recently transitioned to the role of recruitment manager, which handles more of our employer relations, employer-facing things. So I still meet with students, but I meet with students who are doing things that they're not supposed to be doing, misrepresenting themselves. We have within the graduate, so there is a graduate student career development center that is a group of individuals who are specifically working on serving the graduate student populations. We're in the process of transitioning and finding my replacement, but I believe my colleague Bernadette So, who's our director, is going to be taking over, coming and doing these presentations for you guys. But you can go and see any counselor within the Wasserman Center. I mean, I've worked primarily with social work students. I also manage our career fair team, so we'll be working with Shilpa on that. So I'm kind of like everywhere, but not doing as much one-on-one student stuff as I used to be doing. I mean, I will definitely say one of my colleagues Diana Martinez is a social worker. She has a BS in social work, and she's wonderful. But you can pretty much see anyone. I was seeing social work and even like nursing students long before I joined the graduate student career development team. So anybody in our office will be able to speak to you about certain stuff. If it's general resume questions, you can see, specific stuff. Some of the more specialized social work things, I would say, see the grad center team for. And then a lot of the questions too can be really to Shilpa, to Dean O'Mealy about opportunities and things, just because you guys are such a specific field and there are so many NYU students. There's like 60 of us and there's 40,000 NYU students, so we can't be as specific as we would like to be in every single case. I also don't have an educational background in social work. I have a BA in political science and international studies and a master's in higher ed. So there are commonalities and things, but then it really depends on how you want to use us. So it's a very long answer to an easy question. All right.
So if we want like one-to-one help with the resume?
Yeah, you can, so there are a couple of different options. We have walk-in appointments, which take place in our office. And you can actually look up on the Wasserman website. We list all of the different, I think today they're from 2:30 to 4 and 5 to 6:30. And then tomorrow from 12 to 1:30. So you can come in. Those are quick 5-minute reviews of your resume. I never recommend that as the first time. If you really want to make changes and actually have a conversation with someone, that's not necessarily the best vehicle. The walk-ins are more if you know you can't get an appointment within the next couple of days, but you have an application deadline that you need to meet or you need to submit it to a faculty member. Those are good appointments for that, or after you've made edits and just going to have somebody do a once-over for it. But I very strongly recommend 30-minute career coaching. So on NYU CareerNet, when you log into that site, on the right-hand side, there will be a scheduled career coaching appointment link. Click on that and then just hit availability, and that will let you know who the next available appointments are. Probably you won't now because today's Thursday. The earliest appointment you'll either get is Monday or Tuesday. We require students to schedule at least 48 hours in advance because we review every single appointment. We also want to prepare ourselves to meet with you so that it's not, that 30 minutes goes by really fast. So we want to make sure that, if you're telling us that you want to come in for your resume or you're coming in for job search questions or things like that, that we're ready to talk about like what it is that you want to talk about.
Or would you be able to get someone who works specifically with graduate students?
You can, so everybody specifically works with graduate students. We are not limited to just the graduate student center specifically only sees grad students. That's just how the center was created, and they do programming like this, but everybody sees grad students. So you could see, I know, an MSW student and not see a freshman the next, appointment after. Our model doesn't necessarily that there's only one person. It used to be me. It's now going to be someone else, but we're in the process of transitioning.
So what does the Graduate Student Career Development Center actually do?
So we only see graduate students, but we serve every graduate student population on campus. So we have a liaisonship to the Silver School. We serve all 54 graduate student departments at GSAS. So there's five of us now that do that. But we're only limited to seeing grad students. Everybody else sees grad students. They're just not limited to seeing grad students. Plus, we develop all of the programming that's specifically for our graduate student population. So like resume, CVs for PhDs, resume guidelines, marketing your master's degree, things like that. So we do a little bit of everything, but it's specifically focused to the graduate student population. We're a generalist model office just because NYU is such a big community. So that's kind of what we have found. It's not exactly the best model. It doesn't necessarily serve everybody all the time, but it's kind of the way. All right. Any other questions? Yes?
I just had a quick question about if we should put like the licensure expected.
Yes, actually, really good question. Sorry, and I should have mentioned this. Usually, I usually recommend when you we know that you have to get certified and have to pass all the credentialing on it. So some students will actually put that as the very first section. So like your contact information, and then do a licensure and certifications heading. And say New York State, New Jersey, if you're CPR certified, AED, whatever the case is, and then put whatever the like your license number, when it expires, all of that stuff. So yes, really good question. Sorry about that.
If it's like the expected date, is that like too much?
You can put the expected date. I mean, remember the thing is too, and I tell this for anyone specifically in like a field that requires you to have a licensure, knock on wood, we're going to hope that you pass the first time. But remember too is that your job may be contingent on whether or not you get the license. So you can put when you expect to take the exam, or like when, whenever you need to complete the requirements by. But remember too, then you're kind of like holding yourself when you're applying for full-time positions. And I say this to my nursing students all the time too. You sometimes may not pass on the first go. So, teachers, same thing as well on different certifications. So you want to kind of put when you're expected to take the exam or when the paperwork is supposed to be completed, and then you can give an estimate, and then you kind of just got to go with it. But then that eventually should change to when your license actually is issued. Okay.
So you should put the license once you get it up.
Yeah, you can say expected. Like we see this with our nursing students a lot when they take their NCLEX exam. So they say register to take exam in July 2016. Same thing can be relevant for social workers when you're. Yeah. All right. Thank you guys very much. Enjoy the rest of the day. Yeah, of course.